This is the third part in the series on reactive programming in Dart and Flutter. In this video, we'll look at some methods and properties that will help us to extract some data from our streams. If you didn't watch the first two parts of this series, you should definitely watch that, and you should also watch my video on futures, because they will come up in this video. So as you can see, I'm using the getNumbers function from our previous video. And I also have this clone function that throws an exception midway through, because we're going to look at some error handling. You will be using some methods and properties more often than the others, but it's still good to be at least aware of most of the options out there. Okay, so as you can see over here, I have a lot of commented out functions, and when we run our programs, we're going to uncomment each function and see what it's about. So the first one is about the listen method, so let's go up here. Okay, so first one is the listen method. We covered this one in the previous video, but today we'll go a little more in depth. The listen method takes in a high order function that is called every time a new piece of data is available from a stream. That is pretty obvious in this example. Here we get our numbers stream, and every time a new piece of data is available, we just print it. We did this in the last video, but just for demonstration purposes, I just want to show you again how to do it. So let me also comment out the other two solutions we're going to take a look at, and then I'll run the program. Okay, with these commented out, let me go down to the main function and uncomment the listen method. Alright, now let's run the program and see how this works. So if you forgot from our last video, our getNumbers function returns an integer, then delays it for 1 second, or actually I'm not sure, because in the previous video I think it was in reverse. I think we paused for a second and then delivered the integer, but it really doesn't matter. So this is what our function does, and it's going to do it 3 times, so 3 seconds. What's supposed to happen, since we're listening for that, it should print out the number 1 and then wait for a second, then print out the number 2 and wait for another second, and then print out the number 3. And also your program may not work if you don't put the async modifier on here. And also, if you forgot from the last video on how to run a Dart program, you go to the command line and find your program in your directory structure, and then just write Dart and the name of the file your program is located at. So let's just write Dart, and let's write main.dart, since that's the name of the file all my code is at. And now I'll just press enter. Okay, now let's run the app. And as you can see, it did exactly what we expected. Okay, but now let's take a look at the definition of the listen method. And we can see that it returns an instance of the stream subscription class. And that's interesting because the stream subscription class has a couple of interesting methods. One of them is onDone, that takes in a function that will execute once the stream is finished emitting data. This can be useful if we want, for example, to print the sum of all the numbers that were emitted once the stream is closed. We can do that by adding the numbers one by one in the listen method to some kind of a pre-declared variable, and then use the pre-declared variable in order to print it in the onDone method. So here let me comment out this code and go down a little bit to find our second example. So let me just comment this, remove this over here. And here what we're doing is declaring a sum variable, and then every time our getNumbers stream emits something, we add that to the sum, and when it's done emitting all the data it has, then we'll just print out the whole sum. So let me run the program, and now we wait for 3 seconds. And as you can see, it printed out the correct sum. So in this method over here, we're getting the value 1 and then the value 2 and then the value 3. When they are added up, that's 6, just like over here. Okay, now let's take a look at some error handling. And that is made pretty easy with the onError method that's available in the stream subscription class. It also takes in a function, but that function executes once there is an error thrown inside of a stream. So now I'll comment out the sum solution we had. And over here I'm using the quote-unquote clone function that we have over here that throws an exception once I reaches the value 2. So pretty self-explanatory. We print out all the data as it comes, and then if an error occurs, we just say that some sort of an error occurred. And as you can see, we have the error property inside of this high order function, which means that we can use this error in order to troubleshoot what exactly happened. So the flow of this thing should go like this. We would get yielded the value 1, and that would be printed onto the screen. And then we would wait for a second, and then since 1 is not equal to 2, we would go back. I would get incremented. Then it would emit the value 2, wait for another second, and then see that the I is equal to 2 and throw an exception. And then it should print out the error occurred because of this onError method. That means we won't get the value 3, but we'll get this error occurred. So let's try it. And it was exactly as we expected. Alright, so the next thing we have is a wait for. A wait for is not a method or a property, it's just some kind of a syntactic convenience for iterating over a stream. So basically, a wait for needs to be executed inside of an async method, and it functions pretty much the same as the for loop. But the thing with a wait for is it's going to wait until all the values are emitted from a stream so we can iterate over them, and then it's going to execute what comes next. In our example, it's printing the sum. You can see how this can be useful in our sum example. We can declare the sum variable above the loop itself, and then loop over our stream just like we would loop over any other collection, and then add up the numbers, and then when everything is done, just print the sum. So now let me go down over here, comment out the listen method, and uncomment the await for method. Now let me save the file and we'll run the example. A wait for should do pretty much exactly as our example up here on adding up the numbers and the sum. It's just a little bit more readable and convenient. So let me run the example just for the demonstration purposes. As you can see, pretty much what we expected. We waited for 3 seconds in order for all the values to be emitted and added up, and then we just printed the sum. What we could also do is print every number that comes in, just to show them all. It really doesn't matter. So this to me seems like a more easy to read solution, because when using the listen method, you would need to do some mental gymnastics in order to see what's going on. It's not that hard, but it will still take you a couple of seconds to, I see what's going on. But over here, when you take a look at the wait for method, if you've done coding for any amount of time, it's very procedural. It really makes sense. You just see it and kind of immediately know what's going on. Of course, sometimes the await for solution is not very useful, because if you just want to iterate over all of these values in the stream, but also continue at the same time to execute whatever it's under it, then it's just better to use the listen method. But if you need to wait for all the values to be emitted and then execute something else, then a wait for is just fine. Next, properties and methods are pretty much all used in the iterable class and do pretty much the same thing. Only difference is with the iterable, the results are returned immediately, but when they're used with a stream, you need to wait for at least one of the values, oftentimes more, to get a result. And that's why these return futures and not just the values immediately. Even if you have worked with some of the methods and properties in order to get results from an iterable, I still recommend watching this video, because while researching, I found quite a few I didn't know myself. So before we jump on to the next one, let me comment out the await for method and uncomment the next method. So next up is the isEmpty property. This property is a feature that waits for the stream to be closed and then returns a boolean value in order to indicate if the stream emitted any values during its life cycle or not. So let's try this out. I think I commented and uncommented everything I had, so yeah. Let me save the file and run the console application. We'll have to wait for 3 seconds. Oh, actually, we didn't have to wait for 3 seconds, because as soon as our stream emitted its first property, our isEmpty future immediately knew that at least one thing was emitted, and it could just immediately return false. But let's make our stream empty. Let's just go over here and uncomment this line, which will basically make our stream useless. It won't yield any values. So let me save this and run this. Now we have to wait for 3 seconds in order to see that the stream is actually empty. Now I'll just uncomment the yield keyword and go down to the main function and uncomment the next function and comment this one and go over here. So the next up is the first property. Again, it's just a future, but this one waits for a value to be emitted from a stream, and then as soon as that's over, it just returns it. If the stream is empty, our .first future will return with an error. So let's try this out. Let me save the file and go main.dart. And then as soon as we got the first value, it just printed it out to the screen. But again, let's try just commenting the yield keyword to see if we really get that error. Let me save this, run this with dart main.dart. And here it is, we have an error. And as you saw, we had to wait for 3 seconds for the whole stream to just come to an end in order to see if this was empty or not. So let me just uncomment this and then do the same thing, comment and uncomment. Next up is the last property. The last property does pretty much the same thing as the .first property, it just returns the last one instead of a first one. And the same rule holds true here. If the stream was empty, then we'll get an error. So let me just run this for the sake of, demonstration. And here we had to wait until we got to the last value. Actually, we had to wait until the whole stream was over to see what was the last value emitted. Alright, next up is length property. Again, this one is a future that waits until the whole stream is done and then just, counts how many values were emitted from a stream and returns that. So let's go down here, again comment uncomment. Okay, let me save the file and let's run this. It should return the value 3 since we are yielding like 3 values. And again, we're waiting until the whole stream is over and we have 3 values. And let's try and now emit 2 values per an iteration of the loop. And since the loop iterates 3 times, it's going to emit 3 times 2 values and then we should get 6. So let me save this, run it, then we'll have to wait for another 3 seconds and we get 6. Now let me just go back and remove this. Alright, the next up is the single property. This one returns a value that was emitted from a stream if there was only one value emitted. But if there was more than one value emitted, then we would just get an exception. So in theory, if I try to run this, since our getNumbers stream emits 3 values, that means that we should get an exception. So let me try and do that. And as you know, we just got a little exception and it says bad state, no element. As you can see, we got an exception, but what if we just moved this up here so we would get just one value and let's just yield 1. So when I save this and run this, we get value 1 since only one value was emitted from our stream. Let me just get this back to its previous state. Alright, now we have the any method. This one checks if there is a value emitted from a stream that meets some kind of a condition passed in as a high order function. So as you can see over here, I just use this any method and check if the value is equal to 3. So this any method will just go through every value that's emitted from a stream and check if it's equal to 3. And if there is any of the values that are equal to 3, it will just return true. But if not, it will return false. We can do pretty much any logic here. We're not limited by just equality. We can check if this is greater than 3. We can just check some random stuff. We can straight up return false, but this will be kind of useless. Usually it should be related to the value passed in, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense to go through each and every one of the values. So let me just save this. I don't think I have done the comment uncomment thing. So over here, if our number is equal to 3, we should get this out on the screen. And since we have a value that's equal to 3 emitted by our stream, we should get this type of a response. So let me run the app, and we're just waiting. And it says there is a number equal to 3. But let's say if there is a number less than 2, maybe. And let's just check this out. There is a number that is less than 2, and then run the app. And as you can see, this executed quicker than the first one because it analyzes every single result as they're coming in. So we got first the value 1 and it immediately checked if it was less than 2. And since the first value was less than 2, it could just return true without worrying about anything else. But now let's check if there is a value that is less than 1. So let me save this, run the app. And then it will just go through each and every one of those, and it says there's not a number that is less than 1, obviously. Alright, the next one is the contains method. And this one is pretty simple, it's just a more limited type of any. So it takes in an object parameter and checks if that object is emitted by a stream at some point. So let's run the app, say dart main dart, and we will wait for a couple of seconds, and it says there is a number equal to 3. But what if we say 1? As you can see, we waited for a couple of seconds, but if there's a number equal to 1, this should go faster, right? And as expected, it goes faster because we're getting the value 1 immediately, and we can immediately say that there is at least one thing in there that is equal to 1. And like if we put in 9, I don't know, let me just replace all of these so this don't get confusing. Let's say 7. And it's just going to say there's not a number equal to 7 because obviously. The next one is the element at method. And this one, as I said, these are the methods from the iterable class, pretty much do the same thing. So it just collects all the required results from a stream and returns a value that was at the index that was passed in. So let's say here we said we want the index of 2, which means the third element in the stream. So it will wait for the third element in the stream and then return it. But if we said 0, it would just wait for the first element in the stream and immediately give it out. So let's try with 2. Let me just do the comment uncomment thing. Right, save the file, run the app. And as you can see, we waited for a couple of seconds and got our value. Well, let's say we want it at 0. We should, in theory, get this immediately because there is no reason to wait for other stuff to be emitted from a stream. Let's go dart main.dart. And it immediately returned 1. If we go out of the range, it should probably just throw an error, like it would with any other array. And yes, it tried to get the 10th element, actually the 11th element, but really doesn't matter. And it saw that there were just 3 elements and we just got an exception. It says range error, index out of range. Okay, so the next step is first where. This thing will return the first object emitted from a stream that meets some sort of a condition that was also passed in. So we can also pass anything in here, but it also should be related to the parameter over here. So over here we're saying if it's greater than 1, so we should get 2. So let me just comment this out, get this back over here, save the file and do dart main dart. And we got the value 2, but what if we say something less than, I don't know, 12? Then run it again. And we again get an exception. It just says no element, it couldn't find any elements. The next method over here is last where. I'm not even going to run this thing because it does pretty much the same thing as first where. It just goes and finds the last element that meets the condition passed in over here. Next up is the join method. This kind of just collects all the elements from a stream and puts them into a single string. And you can also pass in the separator as I did over here, and you can pass any type of string in, and it will just put that separator in between every two elements. So let's run the app and see if this works. As you can see, it just put them all into a single string and put these between them. Alright, and the last one we have is single where. This again checks against some sort of a condition we have, and if there is only one value that meets the condition, then alright, it will return that value. But if there is more than one value that meets the condition, it will throw the exception. If there aren't any values that meet the condition, it will also throw an exception. So here I have an example that says if it's less or equal than 1, and that will just return 1 because we have 1, 2, and 3, and only 1 meets the condition of being less than or equal to 1. So let me run this just to check it out. And as you can see, it just emitted 1. And here it's not like with the first where function, because the first where function, as soon as it finds something, it just returns it, but single where needs to make sure that there is only 1, so it needs to wait for the whole stream to be over. But let's say if it's less than or equal to the value of 2, and that should cause an exception because we have two numbers that kind of match that condition. It's number 1 and 2. So let me say this, run main.dart, and obviously we get an exception, too many elements. But what if we said less than or equal to 0 maybe? Save this, run this, and we wait for a couple of seconds and get another exception that says no element. Alright, and that's pretty much it. In next video we're going to take a look at operators, which are very useful for mutating the data we get from a stream in a very creative way.